Are you ready to go then? Yep. We're live now, Chair.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Harriet. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's Climate Emergency Advisory Committee. You're most very welcome on this slightly overcast Thursday in October. So, just a reminder, this meeting is streamed out on the Council's YouTube channel. And as I always say, with incredible repetitiveness, 7.2 billion potential viewers. So all behave yourselves. Right, so good morning, mute the microphones so we can avoid feedback. And if you could use the hand up function in the participants list to indicate you want to speak, that would be great. Harriet, just be advised, I've just had a quick flash up saying my internet connection is unstable. So I'm just gonna ask, can everyone hear me okay?
We can hear you, Chair. We lost you briefly.
Okay.
You froze momentarily, yeah.
Okay, I hope that won't continue. Fingers crossed. So if I don't see you on the hand raising function, participants, just make it known in a waving manner. I think that usually works. Right, so let's do some introductions. So as I normally do on this committee, we're going to go through them alphabetically. So if I start with Councillor Anderson.
Excuse me, sorry. Councillor Barry Anderson, Adlin Wharfdale Ward.
Councillor Bentley.
Morning, Councillor Jonathan Bentley, Wheatwood Ward.
Councillor Buckley.
Morning, Chair. Councillor Neil Buckley, All Woodley Ward.
And that's Councillor Forsyth, who's subbing for Councillor Blackburn, joined us yet. Anne, if you'd be so kind as to introduce yourself.
Good morning, Councillor Anne Forsyth, Farnley and Wortley Ward. I'm actually now been swapped with Councillor David Blackburn. Okay, so I'm actually now part of this committee.
Oh, wonderful. Welcome aboard. Pleasure to have you. Councillor Garthwaite. Now, this might be a product of Councillor Garthwaite's limited connectivity. Okay, we'll come back to Al. She's en route and demonstrating the amazing Councillor Carlisle.
Sorry, Chair, we're losing you a little bit. Hi there, everyone. Councillor Carlisle, Carvel in Farsley Ward.
Thanks very much. Councillor Illingworth.
Hello, John Illingworth from Kirkstall Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Midgley.
Morning, Maral Midgley, Councillor for Kippax and Methley Ward.
Councillor Mulheron.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Elisa Mulheron, Ardsley and Robin Hood Ward, Executive Member for Climate Change, Transport and Sustainable Development.
Councillor Shazad.
Morning, Chair. Councillor Mohammed Shazad, Moortown and Meanwood Ward. Thank you.
Councillor Wadsworth.
Good morning, Councillor Paul Wadsworth, guys in Road and Ward.
And last on our elected members list, Councillor Ray.
Councillor Paul Ray, Hunslet and Riverside Ward.
Thank you very much. Also, if I could just go through our officers to introduce themselves. Polly Cook.
Hi, Polly Cook, Chief Officer, Sustainable Energy and Air Quality Team.
And is Neil Evans on the call?
I think he sent his apologies.
Okay, fine, no problem. And Harriet Spate.
Good morning, Harriet Spate, Governance Officer.
Thank you, everybody. Right, so let's rattle through our sort of administrative items and then we'll get on to the minutes. So, item 1, Harriet, any appeals?
There are no appeals today, Chair.
Item 2 is any items exempt information?
There's no exempt information, Chair, today.
Any late items?
No late items.
Okay, elected members, are there any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests? If now indicate, no, shaking heads, wonderful, thank you so much. And apologies for absence, well, it's Councillor Forsyth is now coming onto the panel instead of Councillor Blackburn, so we're we've covered that. Okay, so if we turn colleagues to the minutes, item 6 of our last meeting, could you take a moment to look at those? I don't propose to go through them page by page, but if you could glance at the minutes and let me know if there are any matters arising, and then we can move them as a true record of the meeting. Are we all good?
No.
Councillor Illingworth, yeah.
Yes, Chair. I wouldn't want to challenge the minutes, but just to express some reservations about items 19 and 21, biodiversity and food. I'm a little concerned that we seem to be passing biodiversity behind us and moving on to food. It worries me. We've got a big scheme in Kirks, as you know, at the moment. There's a full-on conflict between biodiversity requirements and food growing requirements. We have to resolve it. It's politics and a little bit of religion as well. But I recognise the situation. Having spent my whole life in science and so forth, we're making a transition from the scientific objective sphere to the opinion and passionate belief sphere. Just want us all to be alerted to that, because it isn't necessarily the case that everything people tell you is true on either front, and you need to recognise it as an area of active growth, development, leading conflict resolution at times.
Okay, no, it's a good point, well made. We'll note that into the minutes. Are we prepared to move those as a true record then? Silence is acquiescence, or something like that. Wonderful. Okay, thanks very much. So now move on to item 7. So this is open forum. So as colleagues already know.
Sorry, Chair. Just to interrupt there, we're having a few technical difficulties today with playing the video. Can I suggest that we come back to this item at the end of the agenda? If
we can.
Thank
it
you.
It has the hallmarks of one of those mornings, doesn't it? Councillor Garthwaite, by the way, has messaged onto the chat saying she can hear, but she's got technical issues with pictures, but she is here and she can participate. So, okay, so open forum to the end. That's fine, Harriet.
Thanks, Chair.
Yeah. Okay, in that case, bear with me. Right, in that case, let's move to working groups update, item 8, so I can hand over to Polly.
Okay, so this week we have had restarted the meeting. So we've had the biodiversity and food working group. So this time we looked at the food report that was taken to the last SEAC committee and started looking at the actions, and the group have asked for further presentations and further kind of expertise to be brought on vertical farming and also in terms of carbon storage within soil. So we're just investigating how we provide that. There was also a real emphasis on how we actually train up and engage the public in terms of their own kind of planting and local food production, and how we better promote the availability of sites, so where there are sites available for members of the public. And also we're starting to look at the links with wider stakeholders, so things such as obviously existing farmers of any size or scale in the city, and also the National Farmers Union. So that was kind of the discussion around food. And then we also were really lucky to have Kat Scott, who was an environmental scientist from the university, and she came to present to us on her research about carbon capture. And I suppose one of the kind of key or most interesting facts was not only the carbon capture of woodlands, but also outside of woodlands. So the trees that we find on our streets or in our gardens, and you know that within Leeds and within a more urban area, that actually the woodlands and the outside of woodland trees have equal importance in terms of carbon capture, emphasising the importance of protecting trees. So that's something the group's going to explore in more detail in terms of the scope of tree protection orders, how they can be used to best effect. And also the group going forward will act as a sort of consultee on the White Rose Forest strategy that's due to go to exec board in September. And the overall work of CATISPO, there was an emphasis on the limitations of offsetting and about the real need to reduce carbon down, and then the trees come in to kind of mop up that final part, but the carbon reduction has to be at the forefront of what we do. So that was the biodiversity and food. In terms of transport, that took place yesterday. And we had kind of in-depth discussions around the active travel neighbourhoods that are proposed in the city, and also around school streets, and heard some of the positive feedback that's been received, how the scheme has progressed over time and the changes that have been made, and also heard some really detailed research on activity and the associated health benefits, and the wider scope and the way that that's going to move forward. And then there were specific sort of areas that members asked to explore in more detail in terms of sort of geographical areas that we've kind of taken away to have a look at. The final working group is not meeting until next week, and they're starting to look at domestic energy at that first meeting, although the planning white paper was circulated to the committee for comment. So I think that's everything. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Polly. Any questions, colleagues, on what Polly's had to say? I mean, there's obviously we started the working groups up, and there's a lot of work been going on through the summer and into the autumn, and it was good to hear. Particularly the vertical farms, I thought was very interesting for an urban area like Leeds. And also put it bluntly, if everyone who had a garden and hadn't got any trees in it planted a tree in their front garden and a tree in their back garden, we could do an awful lot, and that was quite heartening to hear. So, no comments? Good grief, this is unusual. Okay, so now let's move on to item 9, which is voltage optimization. And it pains me to say this, but until this was brought to me, I'd never heard of this. This is an entirely new area of technology, if you like, the application of technology. So we're really pleased we've got this item. So we've got 20 minutes on this item. So our speaker is Keith Jackson, who's gonna tell us all about it. And Keith, you're on. Can you hear us all?
I can hear you beautifully. Can you hear me?
We can indeed. Keith, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for listening to me this morning. I'll try and respect your time and the good work you're doing. But I've got 3 objectives this morning, if I can describe it. One is to say that we have a problem. One is to say that we have a solution. And then one is to say, can I solicit your support to help me make sure that the benefits which come from all of this are more widespread than they might otherwise be. So I'm not asking you to do much, but to consider whether at the end, you as a group could help me in my single-handed campaign. So that sounds a bit, that's the objective anyhow. So if that's okay with you, I'll make a little start, okay?
Please.
First of all, you may say, well, who am I? Well, I'm just an ordinary unsponsored resident who lives in Boston Spa. But the background was that I started as a power engineer through apprenticeship in the electricity companies, the old area boards. And in my early engineering career, because I'm a fellow of the Institution of Electrical Engineers, I was designing networks and dealing with voltage complaints, which in those days, many, many years ago, was invariably low voltage. And I used to have to say to customers, yes, we know we've got a low voltage problem, but we'll get some more substations or copper in the ground and it'll all come right next year. So that was my history. I then progressed through until I eventually became a through manager and eventually main board director in various electricity companies across the country. And then was there at the time when we moved from nationalisation to privatisation and stayed with the company. As it happens, it was East Midlands Electricity for about 3 years thereafter, and then retired. So my background, but in that time, I've had a great cause in championing the customer, getting value for money, invented all sorts of schemes to work to that end. So in my retirement, I've done many things. I was chief executive of a business link in Nottinghamshire, but in recent times, I'm just a champion of the community and have been very involved in doing the neighbourhood plan for Boston Spa, which is now made. In that process, I was able to give a lot of input in the steering group. And in particular, we were looking at the environment and climate change and things like that. And I had personal experience in a house where when I fitted photovoltaics on the roof, I was then experiencing high voltage on my local, on the supply into my house. And I checked with Northern Power Grid, which is the successor to the old YEB and Northeastern Electricity Board. And they put in a chart, a device for a couple of weeks to establish that indeed I was getting high voltage at times and that they would have to do something about it because it was exceeding the upper statutory limit. So the way that they did this was to go to the local substation and alter the tapping on the local transformer. And that brought the voltage down by about 6 volts and everything was fine. But having done that, I realized that myself and the rest of the neighbors on that substation were getting the benefit of reduced voltage. And if you go back to simple physics, volts times amps equals watts. So if you reduce the volts, you reduce the watts, and it's the watts that we buy, we pay about 15 pence per 1,000 of them. And so if you can reduce the volts and the equipment still works, you've got an energy saving, a cost saving. So that was the advantage. And I thought, well, if I'm getting the benefit and my local substation people have got the benefit, I wonder how many more there are in Boston Spa that might get the benefit if we were to look. Now, there are 17 substations in Boston Spa, so I did some random checks, and sure enough, many people getting high voltage. So that's the start of the story. And if I could ask Harriet to put the first slide up, please, is that okay?
Yes, of course.
So this is a chart to give those who don't understand engineering, electrical engineering. What we've got here is a situation where there seems to be a leakage, and the players in this game are the electricity supplier at the top who makes the electricity. I'm converting obviously a simple liquid theme so we can convey it. The electricity supplier is the EDF or the generators in some far off power station. Northern Power Grid is the people that own the set of wires which comes into your house, the network, the transport network effectively for the electricity into your house. The customer is obvious and he wants to use the fuel that he's buying to drive the car. But sadly, there is a leakage, and it's a leakage going to the environment. And everybody's happy in that picture. The electricity supplier is being paid. Northern Power Grid is being paid because it's on the meter. The customer is paying, but doesn't know that he's paying an excess amount. And the environment is paying because there's the waste of fuel. Now, if that was one single petrol pump, you'd say problem with the petrol pump or the behavior of the customer, let's get that sorted. But if it's on every petrol pump in the land, then there's a major problem, it's endemic. And I think under those circumstances, there'd be a question asked in the House about what's going on here. So that describes the situation that we've got, and I can give you lots of technical background to it, and happy to do so. So what we found was, I think I'd like to, can that screen come off now, Harriet, please? Is everybody following the thread so far?
Oh, yeah.
Good, thank you. So that's the situation that we found. Now, I became aware by investigating that the policies which Ofgem, the regulations which they use to guide our network monopoly, Northern Power Grid, and every other distribution network company, the policies do not have an incentive for them to even address the actual voltage which is received by the customer. The targets which they set, because it's monopoly, is to do with quality of supply, and the only thing they measure is the number of minutes that an average customer is off supply in any year. And they're paid by incentive to reduce that number. So typically 40 minutes per year, a customer is off supply. And if you ask the customer in the street, what does he think about the reliability of the supply? They'd probably say, yes, it's okay. I can't remember when it last went off. So they're happy with it, so they don't complain. Now, the industry pride themselves, the regulator, Jonathan Brearley, I went to a conference and addressed him there, and the industry pat themselves on the chest and say how well we've done because we've reduced the minutes over the years. The contention that I put forward is that on and off is one thing, but the quality of the supply, the voltage, the quality that's coming in is another thing. And I'd like them to address that. So my objective now is to work towards getting the new set of regulations, which will take place in April 2023, to include a requirement for the network companies to consider voltage. That's my objective. I started with a small thing in one house, which has now gone to the village. And now I can tell you a lot more good news about how it's going to affect your area, the whole of the north east, which is the old Yorkshire Electricity Board and the North East. So let me have a look now at the next slide, I think would probably help you. I challenged Ofgem. They encouraged me to go to Northern Power Grid as my local monopoly supplier. And they came to my house and I persuaded the directors that indeed there was something worthwhile investigating. And they invited me to join their stakeholder panel, which is a panel which they take representation from citizens, advice and local authorities and me as an independent. And having joined that, they asked if they could help. So I asked to go to the control room and have a look at the way the system works. And it was like old times for me. But I also asked that I should see the readings from the smart meters which are installed in my area, my village. And there weren't many because there's the SMET 1 meter technicality and SMET 2 meters, but yes, they could get those readings for me. And after a couple of days, this is the result that was found. So we had a sample of about 35 properties, Sycamore Grove, High Street, Church Lane, whatever it was. And we plotted them for this period to find out what real voltage was being sent back by these clever smart meters that everybody's persuaded to have. Most have not yet thought of a reason why they would want them, but that's what they've got. And would you believe that was the result? Undoctored, total sample, nothing taken away. Everything, what you see in the tin is in the tin. So the voltage, you'll notice, is in a cluster. There are about 35 readings all overlaid there. Every one of them individually can be pulled out to investigate. And you'll see that at times, right at the top there, it peaks just up towards the 255. And down at the bottom, it goes down as low as 226 or thereabouts. The red line at the top and the red line, dotted line at the bottom, is the statutory range of voltage which the electricity company is permitted to operate within. So I'll just retrack a second to say that if I was to ask you, good people, what is the voltage that you'd expect to receive in your house normally, some of you would say 240 and expect praise for me to say, yes, well done. Others would say 230 and you'd get even more praise because it used to be 240. It used to be. And the variation that the electricity companies had when I was an engineer was plus 6%, minus 6%. That was a range between 253 and 226. And we designed the network and operated the network within that range. There is a need for that range because as the electricity goes down the wires, there's a slight bit of voltage drop because of the resistance of the cables and things. So they need a tolerance to work with. However, with harmonization with Europe, the manufacturers of appliances and switchgear and transformers didn't want to make something special for Britain. So there was a harmonization at 230. So you can all have 10 out of 10 because 240 is the old number and 230 is the new number. But the new regulation said 230 minus 6%, which took it down from 226 to 216, that bottom red line dotted that you can see there. So they're allowed to go down to that level. But Britain argued that they wanted plus 10% at the top because there may be some equipment on the network which didn't like low voltage. So they accepted and the top limit went to plus 10%, so back to 253. So Britain has got the unique position where it can operate anywhere between plus 10%, 10% of 230 is 23, gets you back to 253 again. So they've got a far bigger margin to work with, but everybody's happy. Manufacturers are happy because your dishwasher works and the switchgear works that you buy from somewhere in France or Germany. everything is fine, but the industry has not taken any initiative to vary the voltage at your home or the small shop up the street or the small factory or the office. They've decided to keep it for themselves. And you may ask, well, why would they want to do that? And I'm not going to apportion blame, but I think broadly it is that they've had the eye off the ball and there has been no incentive for them to do anything else. They've been looking at minutes lost, but not been looking at voltage. Now, my meeting with Northern Power Grid was welcomed, and I have to say they're being very, very responsive. And as a consequence, we now know that we've got the beauty of millions of smart meters being installed, and smart meters send their voltage readings every few minutes into the control room of Northern Power Grid. And at the moment, the smart meter is set to only give a voltage exception report if it is more than 3 volts beyond those statutory limits. So in other words, it wouldn't make a noise if it was 256 or if it was 213. It would just be silent. I say silent, you know, in actual fact, is the electronic signals. But when I asked them to actually get the volts, we got this result. And it was what I call, or what we call in my family, an aha moment. Whoops, oh dear, what have we found here? We've joined the dots and found something which we didn't expect, and neither did Northern Power Grid. So a bit of an embarrassment for them. What I've now found is that the whole industry across the country has a policy which generally runs the 11 kV system, that's the voltage level which feeds the local substations, at 11 kV, 11,000 volts. And they have got a policy which runs it at 11.1, 11.2, 11.3, and sometimes 11.4. So there's an inherent policy decision for the whole industry to run with voltage higher than is necessary. Let's have a look at the next slide, if I may, please, Harriet. Haven't got it yet. This is the slide of the... Can you hear me, Harriet?
Sorry, Keith, is this the one?
Yes, that's the one. Can everybody hear me? Yes, okay. So I have to say that Northern Power Grid have been really responsive. They've put their arm around me really and said, hey, you found something here, we like you, sort of come and join us, help us do our business plan, things like that. I'm completely unsponsored. I'm a single independent person championing for society, if you like. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm not being paid by anybody, but I'm delighted at the way that they've welcomed me into the organisation with open arms. And between us, and they're much cleverer than I am, and they're up to date with the telecoms and all those things. But what they've done is to come up with a solution, or a proposed solution, which is outlined here. And they've got the agreement of Ofgem. Ofgem, the regulator, is encouraging people to be innovative and indeed allows them to pass through costs. If they can put forward a proposal for an innovative scheme, they allow them to pass those costs through so that it doesn't affect their profit. So in effect, Northern Power Grid has now got a scheme approved by Ofgem, which allows them to carry out some tests, which are called Boston Spa Energy Efficiency Trial. And that's now ongoing and working, and it's got funding for it, and it's ongoing. And you need to do nothing about it other than to be relaxed, knowing that this is going on your behalf and on behalf of all of your residents and small businesses. So this is good news that I'm bringing you. Okay. Now let's just make it simple. Have a look at the diagram, and as it happens, those are the homes in the middle. You'll recognise them. Underneath it says Ordby Lane, Leeds Road, and Warren Lane. They are the primary substations that feed into the 17 substations in Boston Spa. So as it happens, Boston Spa is at a break point in the network. Shall we say 5 come from somewhere, 5 come from somewhere else, and the other 7 come from somewhere else. So Warren Lane is in Cadcaster, Leeds Road is in Collingham, and Ordby Lane is in Wetherby. Okay, so this is diagrammatic. So what we've now got is a number of smart meters sending their regular readings through, your meter readings, your voltage, and all the other data that it sends. and it's going into a data communications company, DCC, that's the oval in the middle. And that data is gathered and distributed according to data protection for the various parties that have got access to it, of which, of course, Northern Power Grid is the principal user. So that from there, we managed to get those voltage charts that I've shown you in the previous slide. Now, Northern Power Grid have agreed that they can indeed move the whole band of that green chart that I showed you. Their objective, my objective, is to move the whole of that band down the graph. You follow me? So if we could knock it down by 23 volts, you'd have 10% saving in volts. If you knocked it down by 10, you get 5% saving in volts. And that's an objective, which I think, if you look at the charts, is pretty good as a target, 5%. So imagine 5% saving on your energy bill, 5% saving on CO2 emitted at the generators, and 5%, another thing here, is the capacity on the network, the electricity wires network, which is going to be used by them when we move towards decarbonisation and electric vehicles and air source heat pumps and things are required to come in to try and shift the load off the gas network and off the petrol fuel pumps. So all of this is good. It's win-win-win. And also people argue that if there's less voltage in your equipment, it lasts longer. Now, I'm not going to claim that, but we need to just understand that the simplistic thing here is you get the data, you manage it, you take it into a smart meter gateway at the top of the chart there. That goes into the beat box, which is the device for saying how much can we reduce or alter the voltage. That goes into the control room, and the control room has a communication system which goes out to Ordby Lane, Leeds Road and Warren Lane. That is done now not by a manual tap, which is your local substation, which is like a water tap on the top of the transformer where a man has to physically come around and do it. But this is done on what they call automatic voltage control, AVC, where the signal from the control room goes to the primary substation, feeding it at 11 volts, 11 kV volts, and can vary it up or down. So we've now got a closed loop, or could have a closed loop, where the voltage tracks the voltage which is coming back from the far end of the furthest customer. Never been done before because they never ever send anybody out to check the voltage in your house. So we've now got the magic of a smart meter talking to the control room, talking to the substation, and varying the voltage in a controlled way. Now that for me is magic. And I have to say, with as a project team within Northern Power Grid, they've commissioned Sheffield University, various other people to do the electrical equipment. There's some improvements to be made to telecommunications. There's various things to do with checking that the control system doesn't go out of control. So there's lots of close processes which are taking place. And there's a project board and their chief engineer and the directors are on it. We're all sort of with this. It's not something in the back office somewhere. We're all on it. And they've included me as the honest broker, if you like, to keep them on track, and they welcome me in that role. So that's the story. I'm sure you've got questions, and I'm sure you've got a limitation of time, but leave time when you've asked me questions, please, for me to come back to you and say, what can we do for you, Keith? If you'll ask that question, I'll be delighted and ready to give you an answer. Over to you, please.
Well, no, thank you, Keith. That was excellent. I think you had me when you said 5 to 10% saving in power. And thus carbon and thus capacity. I mean, it reads like an unalloyed good. So I've got a couple of questions, but just take it as read that at the end of the members' questions, I will ask, what can we do for you, Keith? And then you can answer that one at the end as well. So in the order I saw them, I've got Councillor Forsyth, Councillor Carlisle and Councillor Buckley.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure my hand was the first one to be put up, but thank you very much indeed for this excellent presentation and the win-win-win. I actually went along to the Northern Power Grid workshop last night where this was mentioned, so I was particularly interested. One of my questions is just first of all, is this likely to work for areas? You talked about Boston Spa being a breakpoint. Would this work for other areas that are not?
Can I answer that?
Question, so I'll keep it to that. Yes, thank you.
It's symptomatic across the whole nation. So the objective, by chance, Boston Spa happens to have found me, and I happen to have been sufficiently active to get it revealed. But it's purely a test for Boston Spa at the moment. But the test itself and the Orby Lane and the various primary substations feed beyond Boston Spa. Because this has got Ofgem approval and their payment, it's an open book. It's not concealed. And the view is that at the right time, we want to roll out the results from this along the way, not just at the end, for every network operator in the country to be aware of it so that they can roll it out in their area. Now, in other words, for me, it's 5% for the nation. There's 29 million domestic customers and probably 10 million industrial and smaller consumers. All of those can have benefit of up to 5%. So if you look at that, it's if a typical electricity bill of a domestic customer in your area, my area, and everywhere else is 30 or 40 quid, we're talking about £1 billion a year on energy savings, including for the vulnerable. We're saving a typical consumption of electricity uses about a ton of CO2 to produce. And if we could have 5% of that, you can take that as a credit. And we've got so in other words, the benefit is nationwide. And what I've established is that the policy at running the 11 kV network at 11.1, 11.2, 11.3 is endemic. It's built into the system. And engineers have had no incentive to do anything about it. I'll give you an indication of why incentives are important. When the regulator said you've got a final set of wires, it's a monopoly, we want you to look after your customers and set a target for minutes lost. They've used their best skills and their cleverness to say, how can we save this? So I'll give you a very good example. There is a cable in the street, it's been damaged by JCB or water in the network box, and it's an intermittent fault, and the fuse goes in the local substation. So the engineer is fetched from his bed and he goes out, checks it out, puts a new fuse in, walks away. It's taken him 2 hours and 150 or 250 customers have been off supply for 2 hours. 250 times is the minutes lost by that network operator in the year, and it goes against their credits and they get paid or not paid based on their performance. So they invented, cleverly enough, if they have a cable which is potentially an intermittent fault because JCB's down there and it's done some damage to the cable which keeps on getting moisture in it, and the fuse goes, that's bad, because if they could get there in 3 minutes, it doesn't count. But anything over 3 minutes goes into this count. So they invented a system where there is a slave fuse next to the first fuse, and if within 3 minutes that fuse can be replaced, it saves the engineer 2 hours and the 150, 250 customers. That's been done. It's there now. You could actually go it's on the network. They use it and they praise themselves for being innovative. That was because they were targeted to reduce the customer minutes lost. Now, what I'm saying is if they were to be targeted to check the voltage at the end result, the furthest consumer, and be monitored for that, we would all get the benefit and they could go away home proud at night that they're serving the nation in a better way than they are at the moment. A long answer, sorry, Councillor, but that's the answer.
Oh, again, it's fascinating. Councillor Carlill.
Thank you. That went to providing an answer to one of my questions, actually, so that's fine that the answer was long. First, I want to say thanks for a clear presentation, because that really did explain to us exactly what's behind it, and we don't all have your knowledge and experience of this, so that was great. Thank you, and made it very clear. And thanks for the work you've done. I thought it was a startling reminder of just what one individual could have in terms of an impact on this agenda. I know not all of us have the experience you've got of working there, but if this did change across the country, it's a great thing for us to be able to see that one individual working away has been able to make that change. I was going to ask you a bit about the total savings in cost and carbon, but you answered that a little bit in the last question, but maybe there's more you can expand on what that would mean across the country if this changed. But I just had one other question or observation, really. I mean, when we looked at your chart that showed the fluctuations, it struck me very much that Now, I was one of those that thought we were still on 240 volts, so that's where I need to update some of my thinking. But when you looked at that chart, it would appear that looked similar to my answer. 240 seemed to be about the average that people were getting. Do you think that since the changes were made, really no difference has been made to the amount of voltage that's been putting out? Because it very well looked like 240 was the center to that, and has no effort been made in them reducing that to the 230?
First of all, if you went back to that chart, I don't know whether Harry could do it very briefly. The chart with the green graphs.
Is it the previous slide?
Yeah. Taking a second or two, but it doesn't matter. I think it'll make the point beautifully for you, Councillor Kyle. You can be gathering your thoughts and wondering whether you voted for 230 or 240.
There we go.
There we go.
Excellent.
Now have a look at the mean point in there and tell me whether it's 240. It's probably 242, isn't it? The mean in there. So you're right. So the thinking is, Councillor Kyle, it is hanging around. Now, if I tell you that it's been 25 years since the voltage changed, so for 25 years we've had wastage taking place and nothing has changed. Now, I asked myself why, and I've given you part of the answer. I don't think anybody deliberately did this. They're not doing it for money because the regulation doesn't give them extra payment for extra units consumed. It's filtered that out. It's just that engineers are naturally cautious. We've always done it that way. The transformer, probably when it comes from the factory to the local substation, is probably set automatically on the top setting of the 5 settings that there are. And it's the way we do things, and the apprentice never asked. So in other words, it's endemic because that's the way it is, and engineers are being cautious, and it's a bit like keeping a bit back, isn't it? If you're a butcher, you don't give your prime beef out if you want to keep a bit back for a special customer. So they're being very cautious. Now I'm being cynical, but I need to be at times to get these people to respond to what I'm saying is wrong. They've accepted it. I have to say, Northern Power Grid has accepted it. So does that answer? Oh no, CO2. You asked about CO2. Can we get rid of that chart and go back to the normal, please, Harry? So CO2. Depending on what the generation is at any one time, and by the way, it's the generators that are getting the money out of this by selling more electricity. So me working with Northern Power Grid does no harm to their profits, but it does take away income to the generators out there because they're making electricity and pumping out CO2, and we're having to pay for it. Yeah. When you buy your bill, you pay 15p for a kilowatt hour, and out of that 15p, about 3p or 2p is going to Northern Power Grid, and the other money is going to the generator for the actual stuff that is being shifted down the wires. Yeah. If you look at that, depending on the particular moment of production of electricity, there is a different amount of CO2 being produced, and there is a daily live app that you can get which tells you precisely at this moment. Okay, so it's difficult to predict totally what the savings will be, but it will be savings. And on the rule of thumb, I'm told that about a ton of CO2 is the typical use production of CO2 for a typical customer. I'm not going to argue whether that's right or wrong, but if it is that, and we could say 5% of that times 29 million customers, plus the other 10 million there, it's a lot of CO2. And I'm not arguing about the last bit, I just want all of it.
That's excellent, Keith. I am a little bit conscious of time, colleagues. So I've Councillor Butley, then Councillor Bentley, then Councillor Illingworth.
Yes, thank you, Chair. That was a very, very interesting presentation, actually. And when I was at school, science subjects were my worst subjects. I know it reminds me why they were. So if Mr. Jackson wanted a layman to ask a question, he's got the right man. 3 very, very quick questions. Smart meters have got a very mixed reputation, haven't they? And I wondered if he could very briefly tell us why there won't be problems and if people want to change suppliers and so on. That's question number 1. Question 2, in order to achieve the eventual savings, generally in this world, it requires initial upfront costs of some description. And I just wondered what those costs might be in proportion to the potential savings. And then thirdly, is there any possibility that in a household with several people with computers on and televisions and radios and central heating and all the rest of it, that at some point on the lower level, the smart meter say, oh, well, this is too much, so we're going to switch something off?
Let me try and answer. Smart meters, complicated subject, I'll try and make it simple. The government wants us to have smart meters claiming that we will save energy, but the smart meter doesn't save energy. It just tells you how much you're using so that you can switch off when you realize that a kettle takes this or that. So that was the objective, but the potential for smart meters is far greater than most people realize. And I think the clever people in government have realized that. That's why they're rolling it out. When they first started, SMET 1, which is the specification for the first meters that came out, the data was sent to the generators. Those are the people with the trunker, the tanker lorries going back to the factory. Yeah? It was sent to them. And that meant that, the hope was that they would therefore be able to compete by looking at the costs, and it would cause there to be marketing force in there. Later thinking and specification problems caused them to think that that wasn't as good as they had hoped for. So they changed to SMET 2, a different specification. And as from the 15th of March last year, 2019, there was a requirement for SMET 2 meters to be installed. And the data from that goes into that DCC, the data collection company. So it's an independent company. There's one for the north of Britain, one for the south. And all that data goes into there as a data handling thing. And from there it goes to the users. Now then, let's see if I can get back on track with the question that you asked. Now then, the smart meters have got the ability to switch you on and off, but principally they're sending data back on usage at any one time through time of day and then aggregating it into a bill. There is a belief that that may be used in the future for signals to be used to cause you to say, oh, this tariff supplier, Octopus, for example, will give me a tariff where if I can arrange my consumption during the night for 4 hours to charge my electric vehicle, I can have that electricity at 5p instead of 15. So that's the way that the smart meters was anticipated. However, in this case, I think I've found a use for the smart meter, which is costing typically 350 quid a household to install. I found a use for it, which is going to be used for the benefit of everybody, because bear in mind, you're all paying that 350 quid because it's a now allowed cost, which comes down the wires again into your bill. So let's have some benefit from it. After all, it's been spent. And for me, this is perhaps the magic that comes from joining the dots, if you like. So that's the first question, smart meters. I hope that answered that. Does that answer your question, Mr. Buckley? Okay, thank you. Now, the other thing was costs. And I think you were saying these things don't come for free. So what's the capital costs? Well, first of all, the costs, the physical costs that you would be wanting to do, if you wanted to roll this out, would be to make sure that the communication between the control room and the primary substations is adequate for the job. Yeah, you would want to design a software box to handle the data coming in, and you would want to make sure that it was thoroughly programmed. That is in large part being done by Northern Power Grid now. If somebody else wanted, when we've completed, they don't own the copyright to this. It's freely available for everybody, and they've openly said that it's available for anybody who wants it. So the software design of the BEAT program and all of that can be made available to anybody free. And I'm sure that that's my solution, or our solution is not the only one, because what I'm saying is that if this is one solution, there may even be better ones, or there may be improvements to this solution so that we can all get even, okay? And so the costs, there's some noise coming in, don't get here. So the costs, I think Northern Power Grid wouldn't want me to declare the cost, but they have got funding, and this is a 2 or 3 year project, and the cost at the moment, by my book, is heading for about £1 million. And that's for the research, the design of the box, the telecommunications, the extra equipment which might be needed. So circa £1 million, but the benefit is for the whole of the 4 million customers, Northern Power Grid, and then potentially for the rest of the other 25 million across the country. So that's your costs. Come to your house. Could the smart meter cut you off? Yes, it could, but it'll only be done if somebody says, I'm going to cut you off because it's unsafe or because you've not paid your bill. But I'd just like to take that opportunity to tell you that I built a new house which is energy efficient. It's got air source heat pump and photovoltaic and thermal on the roof and all of that. And knowing that this new house that I was building was across the road from the first place where I found high voltage and is therefore off the same network. And I know that at this moment, this morning, for example, I was receiving 248 volts from Northern Power Grid. Bearing in mind, I would be quite happy with 216. So I'm getting 248. But in designing and building the house, I've included my own transformer, which knocks off 15 volts from the voltage which comes into the meter. I also asked Northern Power Grid to alter the tap on the local substation, the 6 volts. So when I read my voltage meter this morning, I automatically add 21 to it. So I'm actually running at 227 plus 21, 248. That's the voltage they would otherwise have been giving me without my intervention. So, and my equipment for the last 5 years has worked perfectly. Air source heat pump, lighting, computers, dishwashers, all the things that people have in a modern house. Never ever failed me. So there's living proof there that it will work.
Fantastic. Right. Keith, I could pretty much listen to you all day. Unfortunately, we don't have all day in terms of time of this committee. It's been really fascinating. I've got Councillors Bentley and Illingworth who still want to ask questions. So if we could have brevity of questions and brevity of response, that would be much appreciated. We have covered an awful lot of ground in the subject because I don't want Keith to, at the end, just to, which is going to really be within sort of 5 minutes, just really to say what he wants from us after his presentation. So Jonathan, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Keith. I'll just endorse what everyone else has said. Terrific presentation, very understandable for the lay people amongst us. One question I think you probably answered, but the first thing that came to my mind when you explained it so clearly is why has it taken the industry so long to understand this? And I think you probably answered it in terms of, well, there's no incentive not to. But if you look at other utilities like water and gas particularly, and I used to be in the gas industry, leakage was one of the key performance indicators, both internally and from the regulator. So, but you may have answered that already, but if you've got any more to say on that, I'd be interested. The other one that really caught my attention was you were saying the other benefit, apart from the reduction in CO2, etc., was it enabled more capacity on the network. So as the demands from things like electric cars and the move from gas, etc., you could be meeting some of that demand from increased capacity on the network. Do you know sort of what percentage, what impact in terms of a percentage of, because we probably have a forecast of how much more demand there's going to be on the network. So how much of that could be met by the increased capacity because of lowering the voltage?
Can I respond, Councillor Marshall?
Yeah, please, yeah.
Very briefly, there is no requirement in the electricity regulations to look at the pressure, which is the voltage. I often ask myself, if I was the water company and I was trying to reduce my leakage, what would I do? I wonder if I could get away with reducing the voltage to save the leakage. So I'd reduce the pressure on your network and that would save me leakage. And if it's being counted in a way that I can sort of measure and get benefit from, I would do that. Now that's perverse, but it nevertheless is the reaction of a privatized industry, which is looking after its shareholders instead of its customers.
Okay.
So that's the answer to that one. There is no incentive there. And the simple reason is that, well, it's a bit more complicated. I'm going to make it brief. within the electricity industry, the design of networks is done by the low voltage engineers doing one set of wiring and the high voltage network doing others. Those two, if they were to get together, would get the benefit of scale in any case. But it's not just that, it's habit, I believe, and a wish to be cautious. Okay, the other question was capacity of networks. The next 10 years is going to be, and Councillor Ray will know this, we had a discussion before when I met him once. The next 10 years on decarbonisation is going to be a phenomenal change in the energy sector. And so much is going to happen, but we know that gas has got to reduce, and we know that electricity is going to be the place where, in all probability, there will be extra demand. Witness electric vehicles, witness the fact you can't have a gas boiler in a new house from 2025, witness okay, now if we're saving 5% on the network, it means, and in the energy demand, it means there's 5% saving on the network coming to your house. It'll be spread all over the place, but without it, they're going to have to dig up roads and crossings and disturbance to traffic and society. If we can take the advantage of that 5%, it will avoid the capital expenditure. It will use the assets which are in the ground more effectively than they otherwise would be. So it's a benefit of scale. And typically it's going to, if we can save 5%, then it's 5% within that.
Great, that's really helpful. Now, Councillor Illingworth, I'm sure, has an extremely brief question to ask at this point.
Indeed. Yes, first of all, thank you for an excellent presentation, and I absolutely applaud what you're doing and the benefits that come from it. What you've done really is introduce some negative feedback into the system, isn't it? It's a feedback loop that's monitoring the outcome, the voltage supply to the house, and keeping it more closely within bounds, which is an excellent thing and what to be welcomed. I was just thinking that there is one reason why the savings might not be quite as great as you might anticipate, though it'll still be savings and still worth doing. But if people are already regulating their consumption, their watts consumption, for instance, with room thermostats or with other devices to reduce, other measures to reduce consumption. For instance, the kettle will boil faster at a higher voltage, so the kettle cycle will be shorter at a higher voltage and longer at a lower voltage. So all those measures would tend to correct for the waste anyway. And to the extent that people are already correcting for the waste and keeping within spec, will there surely be slightly less savings than we'd otherwise expect?
Can I come back? Yes, I thought that question might come, and indeed it's one which has troubled me. Volts times amps equals watts, which is where I started. If you want watts to heat your kettle or whatever it is to raise the temperature of a room. So if you reduce the volts, the energy at any one moment is less, and therefore it will take longer for the heat to be put into that place. So you won't save any energy in that utility, in that use. However, motor controls, fans, pumps and things like that, computers, lighting, doesn't need that excessive voltage, and it's there that you can make the saving. Now, I started out by thinking that at its simplest, 1% saving would give 1% saving in energy because of volts times amps. And I modified that and back, said, well, if it's not 5% for 5, it might be 4 or 3.5, but it's still worth having. However, I have read learned papers, and I'm reassured by academics and others that in fact it is very close to 1%. So I'm not going to argue about the bit. All I know is there is a benefit there. And if it's 5 or 4 or 3, I don't care. I just know that when you buy electricity, some of it that you buy is to give the magnetic field for your motor to work and this, that and the other. And that if you don't need it, don't buy it.
Fantastic. Right. Questions done. Councillor Illingworth, actually, that was, by your standards, that actually was quite concise, so I appreciate that. I really do. Keith, in about a minute, and I'm not be honest, we just have such a big agenda to get through on this committee. There's never enough time on committee. But what is it you want from us? Because we've heard your presentation. It's been incredibly interesting. It seems enormously beneficial. I think everyone's very much on side. So what do you want?
Thank you. It's simple, really. I'm a one-man band. I've found something which was quite amazing, and I've pushed it and pushed it and pushed it. And I've used the skill that I've picked up in many, many years and joined dots and caused people to think. So I have a disturbance to the system. And so far, I'm really delighted, and so are others, at what I'm achieving. I'm not doing it for me, I'm doing it for society. Northern Power Grid is on my side, and I'm trying to stay friends with them, but I know that the regulator governs these people by his rules, and they work quite understandably as privatised companies to their best end. The conscience has been pricked of Northern Power Grid. They know that I've told them that if they don't look after the interest of the customer, somebody's going to show it to the public and there'll be a PPI scandal which says, what? For 25 years you've been ripping us off. So, you know, they know that I've got hold of something and they've welcomed it with open arms. I've written and I've met the regulator, Jonathan Braley, the Ofgem regulator, and I've challenged him over the same thing. But he's an economist and he's got a team of people around him and they're sucking through their teeth. And I've been to Bays and they've been giving me the man in the pinstripe suit and his briefcase and apple in his bag, and he's given me the standard procedure. And I'm saying, come on, you guys, think about it. And they're all tunnel vision. I'm now aware that the regulator is going to change the rules and he's in consultation at this moment. And I've made my submissions to him already. And I met the deadline of the 1st of October and sent a 5-page submission. And you have a copy, I believe. Polly, I think you should. So you've got that copy. It makes the points that I've made to you this morning, I think, fairly eloquently. And I'm hoping that that isn't just a single voice from a weird guy somewhere in Yorkshire, but it's taken aboard seriously, because there's a lot of meat in it, if only I can get people to look. So far, the regulator hasn't given me a response to that submission, and it is purely a single submission from an individual, whereas the rest of the industry, National Grid and the electricity companies and Citizens Advice are making their submissions, and I don't believe any of them will include in their input comments about quality of supply, bracket, voltage optimization. Think voltage optimization, think benefits that we can achieve. At the moment, I'm on my own and I'm looking for sponsors. I've asked my local... I've asked my local...
Sorry, Keith.
Time? Is it
no,
time?
well, no, it's just, well, it's both time and the fact you were chopping up a bit. Okay. So it sounds, so it's, to be honest, it's probably one of the power generators tweaking your voltage. I think we can certainly help. One of the purposes of SEAC is to lobby and cajole and to try to influence. We will certainly want to help you in that. So what we will have as a committee is further discussion amongst ourselves, with Councillor Mulheron, who's the exec board member on here, with council, with I would envisage members of Parliament, and also via Councillor Carlisle, who is our person on point with the combined authority, West Yorkshire Council partners as well, to discuss this further. I think we can add some lobbying heft at the minimum. So I do have to wrap this item up now. So I'd like to thank you as the chair for a really fascinating presentation and discussion. We get mixed news on this committee, moments of existential dread mixed with some genuine good news stories. And I think this is one of the good news story items. And I think we'd very much love to help. So I think we'll probably have a very productive working relationship, Keith. So on behalf of committee members, I'd like to thank you for your presentation and everything you've done today, but we do have to move on to the next item, Keith. So thank you very much. You're most welcome to stay and hang around and listen to us, or you can beat off. It's entirely up to you, but thank you very much. So folks.
Thank you very much indeed for listening to me, and I look forward to your support in some way or other when you've considered it.
No, thank you. Right, gang.
Thank you.
Our next item is clean air. So Polly's going to lead off on this with an update on everything that's been clean air related that's been going on of late, including the clean air zone. And we also have available for questions Councillor James Lewis, Deputy Leader of the Council, whose portfolio the CAS falls under. So I think without further ado, Polly, if you don't mind.
Okay, let me just share my screen.
Sure.
Right, can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. I'm having, oh, there we go. It's moving now. It decided to freeze. Right, just. Right, so just starting with sort of an element of background, air quality has been kind of high up the agenda for a long while. And what this chart just shows is actually the sort of progress, you know, going back into the sort of 1995, and the way that we have had a steady downward trend of NO2. However, in 2017, it really came to the forefront in terms of what was happening at a national level and the Clean Air Zone framework that was published. And we were told we had to accelerate compliance. So compliance is 40 micrograms per metre cubed on an annual average. And so we went into the government's national programme and were one of the first cities to get ready to actually move ahead with a Clean Air Zone. So as you will all be aware, we spent a year or so consulting, bidding for funding with government, which we all got approved. And we were proposing to implement a CAS B+, which affected the larger vehicles and included taxi and private hire. And we were issued with a ministerial direction to implement that, to bring our air quality into compliance as quickly as possible. So the zone should have gone live at the beginning of 2020. There were delays with the national technology solutions, which meant it was pushed back. And then obviously with COVID, that pushed it back even further. So we were looking at 2021. So as part of that, the government started looking at when in 2021 we should be looking to bring it in, and started to do their own modelling. When they did the modelling, they started to come to the conclusion that actually we may already be compliant, and they asked us to undertake a review to see whether that would stay if it wasn't for COVID. So if we were to go back to normal traffic levels, actually what would be the outcome? So they asked us, so at a national level, they obviously use national standardised data. Locally, we have the benefit of more localised data in terms of fleet profile and things. So we fed that local data into our review. And what we found was that in terms of even if car transport was to go 5% higher than what, let's call it normal, so pre-COVID, actually we're unlikely to ever exceed legal limits again. And the key reasons behind that, which is the kind of positive story, is that actually our fleet has just changed so dramatically. So if you look at those kind of infographics along the bottom, you've got the 2016 picture of compliance versus the 2020, and it's been a complete turnaround, especially on, for example, the buses. So on the buses, we had, you know, maybe 1 in 20 that were compliant back in 2016. We're now almost at 93%, so, you know, 1 that isn't compliant. And then with the HGV, we're above 80% on both rigid and articulated, but, you know, almost at 90%. And that was never predicted. And I think part of that has been this announcement that there was a CAS coming. It's changed behaviour and it's focused people's minds on what needed to happen. We've obviously had £7 million or £7.5 million we've given out to businesses to support that. There's been a lot of work at a national level around the bus fleet in terms of retrofit solutions. And so we've seen an amazing change and seen a large reduction in carbon as a result. As well as that, we're also starting to see a surge locally in terms of ultra low emission vehicles, and I think, you know, Leeds is actually quite well recognised internationally, believe it or not, for all our work we're doing on the charging infrastructure, for the way that we're setting up some of our local charging infrastructure, and also things like our electric van scheme, which was kind of the first in the country to be running on a larger scale. And things like our free parking for electric vehicles. So there's been a lot to kind of encourage it and just to raise that profile generally. So what's happened? So as of maybe Tuesday, I think this week, we finally received the letter from the government where they have formally revoked the ministerial direction. So we are no longer able to implement a Leeds Clean Air Zone. However, as part of our kind of negotiations, we have managed to keep just over £5.5 million to continue supporting businesses, especially the taxi and private hire fleet, to make sure that they retain the vehicles they've upgraded to, and to carry on supporting more vehicles to change over. So, I mean, just looking at our taxi fleet, we now have 2,300 petrol hybrids on fleet, which is, there's nobody across the country who's got anything comparable to that. So the change we've seen, and what, you know, some of the drivers are saying to us, is actually they're enjoying driving them. They've seen the benefits in terms of sort of the sound and also sort of maintenance and the running costs. We are still under an obligation, as we always would have been, to continue to monitor and evaluate our air quality, and to make sure that, you know, there's no changes or any differences, I suppose, with some of the changing trends we see. So that will carry on, and there will still be data available for individuals to look at. We obviously have an ANPR camera network, and we will use some of that to improve our transport modelling. So traditionally we were quite reliant on just doing kind of one-off counts and things, but actually that network allows us to get a much better picture of what's happening in the city. And we're also exploring other uses, so we're just looking to see what potential that camera network offers. We also at Exec Board yesterday have signed up to the World Health Organization guidelines for air quality, which are slightly more stringent than the English regulations for particulate matter. So early next year we'll be bringing forward a sort of action plan for what else we can do to try and achieve that. And I think as a council we have always said we were never going to be happy with compliance. So compliance was the barrier, the artificial number that was put there. But we've always said that we want to go further and we want to do more to improve because of the impact on health. And so, you know, the clean air zone as it was designed wouldn't offer any additional benefits because we've already achieved that level of compliance. However, we will look for other things and other measures that we can do to try and improve air quality further. We've been asked the question sort of numerous times, well, can't you just carry on with the CAS? And as I've already said, what we had designed wouldn't add any additional benefit because of the level of compliance. If we wanted to do a stricter CAS or something else, we would have to start completely from scratch in terms of consultation, and we wouldn't have any financial support to do so because financial support was just dependent on reaching compliance. I think it's really important to emphasise as well that, you know, the clean air zone was only ever one strand of what we're doing. You know, we have charge points going in all over the city. We are constantly bidding for additional funding and just been successful with another 100,000 just recently for more kind of localised charging for overnight slower chargers. We've got the Wyker and Anjou project going on with rapid chargers coming in across the city. We've had the EV trial scheme where people have been using vans, and as a result, some companies have already bought their own van. Had very popular, strong feedback on sort of social media for that. And then we've had some of the complementary transport schemes that are happening, such as school streets, obviously all the investment in connecting Leeds. And then we recently launched an e-bike trial, which within a week had received over 250 applications. It got coverage in America. And we are lending out those bikes and working through that list at the moment. We actually had to close the application list because the interest was so high, and we're just currently trying to secure some more bikes so that we can get through that list quicker and open it back up, because there's just been so much enthusiasm. And I think all of those show the variety of measures we're taking. So just to summarise, you know, it's a positive news story. Our air quality is now significantly below legal limits. We've got there quicker than we were anticipating. We've had a scientific review both internally and by government and by an independent panel that have shown that our modelling is robust. I think it's really critical that people don't go away with the message that it's linked to COVID, because it's not. It is to do with fleet compliance and fleet levels. So, you know, there shouldn't be a concern about car usage going back up, because that has been considered as you would expect. We've had a fantastic upgrade of vehicles within the city, and we've managed, it says here, sorry, I should have updated this, 6.9 million, so we've actually been given 5.6 of that, so we can continue to support people. But as I've said, we are continuing to work beyond those targets. So I shall stop sharing now, and obviously happy to answer any questions alongside Councillor Lewis.
Fantastic. Thanks, Polly. I think that presentation was what's called by the young'uns as a truth bomb about what's happened in the city regarding everything to do with clean air, especially the CAS, and it's very welcome to hear. So we've also got Councillor James Lewis here to answer questions as well. Councillor Buckley's got to go early, so he's asked if you can ask first. So Neil first, and then it was Councillor Illingworth, then Councillor Shazad. So Councillor Buckley, by all means.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I don't actually have to go that early, but she actually probably finished quicker than I thought she would do. So
do it anyway. Go on.
It was just a brief confirmation question, really. The 5.5 million that we've been left with in order to supply grants and so on. Presumably, when that 5.5 million is exhausted, we're going to have to bring the grant system to an end. So that's the first question. And that therefore, we're not going to be left with any legacy loss, if you like, liability. And secondly, in terms of the infrastructure, which has more or less been completed, what, if any, usages have been considered for this, or will it simply be taken away? That was it, Chair.
Chair, can I ask I'll answer the first part of Councillor Buckley's question, which is, well, there's a broader point here, and we agreed in the medium-term financial strategy for the Council's budget at September Executive Board that as a point of principle, where external funding was either withdrawn or not made available, given the dire state of the Council finances, we would no longer use Council resources to replace external funding. So that's a point to get overall. On the Clean Air Fund, this has always been funding that is sat in a bubble separate from the other council, separate from the rest of the council budget. So everything has been externally funded through the Clean Air funding. So you're absolutely right, Councillor Buckley. Once that money is gone, it is gone. It is a bit disappointing. We did ask to extend the grants to HGVs for converting to compliant vehicles using the remaining Clean Air funding, but the government turned down that section of the request, which is disappointing. But I think that probably covered all the points about the budget and finance.
Okay, and then just picking up the question about the cameras, so we will definitely keep some of the cameras in place in terms of traffic monitoring, because that's part of our air quality obligation to still be able to sort of run those up-to-date models and accurately as possible. We're also looking at potential of kind of moving cameras or using them for schemes that were already going ahead. So rather than have to buy new cameras, being able to use those as a replacement. And then also asking sort of different partners across the city whether there's any use for them, but we don't have to make a quick decision on that. So there's certainly no intention to take them down this year. So we'd allow some time to make sure that the right decision's made for those assets.
Excellent. I'm back. Does that those questions answer, Councillor Buckley? I'm sure they were fantastic answers.
They were very clear. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, that's fine.
Brilliant. Right. Councillor Illingworth.
Yes, Chair. I just wonder if I could probe a little more deeply about the HGV side of things, because I realise where people have complied voluntarily, that's just excellent, and we should welcome that. But certainly when I cycle down the A660, I still see a fair number of aggregate lorries, and you wonder why they need to go into the city centre, and you wonder what the emissions levels are like, and the noise and dirt associated with this transport. Is there anything more we can do to bring HGV operators into line and reduce the impact of HGVs on communities such as your own, Chair?
Well, indeed, yes. Polly?
Okay. So, I mean, ultimately, from a clean air zone point of view, it was about getting the compliance up to Euro 6. It wouldn't have relocated lorries. So in terms of that, you know, ultimately within the next couple of years, you will start to see all lorries upgrade to that anyway, because it came in quicker, the Euro 6 standard for HGVs. I don't think there's probably a lot else I can say in terms of relocating lorries off. It's probably more of a kind of highways question than a kind of clean air question specifically.
Yeah, just yeah. Thanks, Paul. I mean, just on the HGV relocating, it is it is difficult. There is a very limited regulatory path to redirecting vehicles away from particular roads. There's no easy way to do it, as we've discovered for the A616 Headingley, for some of the aggregate trucks we suffer from. It's a long-standing ask of not only Leeds Council, but I think a lot of highways authorities in the country to have those kind of powers, more discretionary powers like that. Councillor Shazad.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome that the government has allowed us to keep the extra 5.5 million, and I hope we could use that money to keep on helping the taxi drivers actually reinvest in cleaner and hybrid or electric vehicles, because I think that's been a very positive thing that's come out of the clean air zone, and I hope we could maybe in some way financially support those that have bought these vehicles at such hard times during COVID as well. And as you know, the taxi and private hire economy has been totally decimated, as have all the other economies due to COVID. The only issue I have is we have many vehicles now, thanks to the government regulation of deregulation of the taxi and private hire industry, because we have many vehicles from Kirklees and Calderdale and other cities fully parked up in our city of Leeds and in our wards with their non-clean fumes affecting our residents. And I think as the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, if SEAC can actually push the other councils, I know they won't have the funding for it, but in a way it's all good us having clean vehicles, and our vehicles are very limited compared to the number of vehicles that come in from outer Leeds and actually stay in Leeds. So that's something to look at. The only other thing is I know it's a positive story that our clean air emissions have come down, but can we keep on pushing those messages that it's a lot better to get those hybrid and those electric vehicles for everyone, not just for taxi drivers, because the price of diesel and other vehicles have come down. So it's in these current times, it's a lot easier for people if they have an accident or they have a bump to make that choice of going for those diesel or those air polluting vehicles compared to going for those cleaner hybrid vehicles. So can we have some clear council sort of messaging going out that even though the clean air, our air is getting better, but we need to keep on striving to make it even better if possible? That's all, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I completely agree. I mean, cross-border vehicles are an issue. So we can raise that at WICA as well, Mohammed. And yeah, having an up-to-date message. I mean, one of the things that Polly and the team have been able to do is demonstrate lower operating costs, whether it's taxis, LGVs, HGVs. So we need to just keep up to date with that. That's a point well made. Is there anything further to add for Councillor Shad's questions, folks?
Yeah, I mean, again, with my licensing hat on, I mean, I think Councillor Shazad has pointed out again, the failings of the 2015 Deregulation Act in terms of allowing taxi and private hire vehicles we don't have a regulatory relationship with to operate so freely in Leeds. And it's something for many reasons, community safety, safeguarding and whatnot, we have wanted the government to revoke, but that's fallen on deaf ears down in Westminster and Whitehall. So far, but we'll continue to make the argument what a mistake that piece of legislation was. In terms of the other councils, our friends and neighbours in Bradford are pursuing a charging clean air zone as well under ministerial direction. I don't believe they're Polly may be able to give us more up-to-date information. I don't believe their ministerial direction has been revoked. Again, I know from my many conversations with the taxi and private hire industry, some members feel targeted by clean air zones, but the way the government have structured them is the moment you have a charging clean air zone, whichever option you go for, A, B, C or D, every single option has taxi and private hire vehicles in it. So Bradford certainly are going to have to do something similar to what we have done. Again, Polly might know more details about the Bradford because I haven't been, I haven't, with all the other problems in the world, been on top of what Bradford are up to.
Yeah, I know. All I can add really is that they're they haven't had their ministerial direction revoked. They are still working towards a clean air zone, but are obviously in, you know, going through the same modelling and discussions. Yeah, and the only other thing to say is we only just got confirmation of funding on Tuesday. Oh, can you not hear me? Yeah, you can. Okay. I don't think Councillor Warshaw can hear me. So we only got confirmation of funding on Tuesday. So we now just have to work through the detail of those schemes, but we will be going out to all the taxi and private hire trades to explain the different things that are available, be it new grants to still be able to upgrade, or maybe support on licensing costs as well. So all of that, we will make sure that we communicate that really clearly. And just to say, our Clean Air Day, we did a week of campaigns, which was very much about, you know, our air has improved, but how can you help us keep breathing clean air? So it was very much along the message that you were suggesting about, you know, keep buying those sort of vehicles and what the benefits and things. But yeah, we'll make sure that's embedded in our comms messaging as well.
Great, thanks very much. Councillor Ray next.
Thank you, Chair. For many people in the south, the biggest issue is actually the motorway, and actually the passing pollution that the CAS would never have dealt with anyway because it wasn't our road. What conversations are happening with national government and Highways England about how they're going to try and reduce the air pollution there, because we still have some of the highest respiratory disorders in the entire city, and a big part of that is not homegrown traffic, it's traffic passing through the city on our wonderful motorway system.
We do work with Highways England in terms of, obviously they've supported our scheme for our electric van scheme. In terms of the motorways, I'd have to refresh my mind, but I think they are not non-compliant roads from the Highways England. So Highways England are under the same obligation as us in terms of monitoring their roads. And I think we have done numerous checks with them that they are not non-compliant. So they are in a similar position to us in that when they target air quality funding, it will be to roads where they are suffering with non-compliance. But maybe we can have a look at it outside of the meeting and have a look in more detail, Councillor Ray.
Yeah, that would seem really sensible. Yeah, that's an issue that's not going to go away. So yeah, let's discuss that another time. Councillor Forsyth and then Councillor Mulheron.
Right, thank you very much for your report. Obviously, it's really good news that the quality of the air in Leeds has improved considerably, and also it's very good news that we're keeping that 1.6 million. I just want to flag up that, as Polly said, the clean air issue is only part of the whole, really. And I think it's important to make sure that we've still got the issue of congestion, especially if we're looking at our safe, active travel as part of that agenda as well. And therefore, the other part of the agenda is also about the climate emergency. So my question is, for all of these electric charging points being put into the city, are they purchasing the electricity from suppliers who are generating that electricity from renewable sources? It's quite an important point, because if people are trying to do their bit for the climate emergency, it's really important that we are generating power from renewables.
Who can pick that one up?
I think the answer to that is yes. If you give me 5 minutes while other people ask questions, I will make sure I give you an 100% accurate answer. So I think it's yes, but let me just double check with someone.
Cheers, Polly. That's much appreciated. It is a good question. And as renewable power, I think, is now the cheapest power in the UK. You'd think people would be buying it from a renewable source. Councillor Mulheron.
Thank you, Chair. So a while ago, since I actually indicated, I know lots of people ahead of me in the queue, but it was really around the question that Councillor Shizad asked about other parts of West Yorkshire in particular. And Councillor Lewis has picked up the point around Bradford introducing a clean air zone. Like him, I'm not fully up to speed with where they're at. But as well, alongside the air quality improvements that the preparations for a clean air zone have had in Leeds, clearly it's also led to a reduction in carbon emissions. And bearing in mind West Yorkshire Combined Authority's commitment and declaration of a climate emergency, just quite keen to see a kind of West Yorkshire-wide effort really to both improve air quality and reduce carbon emissions through encouragement of cleaner vehicles across all of our roads. Like some of my colleagues on this call, my ward is right on the border with two of our neighbouring authorities in Wakefield and in Kirklees. So clearly, the work that we do to improve air quality within our boundaries and reduce carbon emissions in our boundaries does have knock-on effects. People do travel into and out of our city, into neighbouring areas. So just kind of interested to pick up that kind of conversation across the broader footprint. And obviously we've got mayoral elections coming up next year, and I'd hope that all of the candidates will be supporting efforts to clean up our air quality across the piece and to reduce carbon emissions through such measures. Thank you.
No, thank you. I mean, should we get for our next meeting, should we get an update from YCARS to bring together what they're doing and what West Yorkshire Partners are doing? Yeah. And I can write to them as chair on everyone's behalf and saying the good work that Leeds doing and why aren't you doing the same? And check if you are doing the same. I think that'd be a good start. Polly, you wanted to come back now with an answer to that question?
Yeah, I'm pleased to confirm that I was right, and it is 100% green electricity. So just didn't want to give the wrong information.
Fantastic.
Very good
Excellent.
news. Thank you very much.
It is good news. Now, I don't have any more requests to speak on this item. I don't think. Great. Okay. So we have open forum and then next meeting left. Now we only have one film for open forum, Harriet. So do you want to do the honours, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can I ask Chad to open this up? Thank you.
Is that coming through? Can everyone see that now?
Yes, it's good.
Okay, I'll press play.
Hello, my name is Simon Campbell-Skelling and I'd like to talk today about a step I think the committee could recommend to the council to help in the fight against climate change, and that would be to pass a motion that either their pension fund provider, West Yorkshire Pension Fund, stop immediately divesting in any fossil fuels and get rid of the fossil fuel industry holdings they hold within the next 5 years, or that they will find another pension provider. And there are other options. There are councils across the UK who've either completely divested of investing in fossil fuels or are doing so over the next 5 years, as well as the Environment Agency, the City of New York, and hundreds of organisations worldwide who've seen it the way the world is going. I'm going to look very quickly, cover two sides of this. Let's quickly look at the financial reasons for this, and then I'll talk a little bit about the moral arguments. Financially, in the last quarter, the fossil fuel holdings, in the second quarter of this year, the fossil fuel holdings held by West Yorkshire Pension Fund, the value of them has dropped by 1.8%, and the dividend value has dropped by 16.4%. Now, West Yorkshire Pension Fund are blaming this largely on COVID. However, I would argue that this is part of a wider trend. In fact, the electricity transition, think tank, Ember, have recorded that throughout the world in the last 5 years, there is a growing trend of year on year fossil fuels are being replaced by renewable sources. And in fact, in this year, in year 2020, for the first time ever, for the first half of this year, more of Europe's energy came from renewables than came from fossil fuels. So this is part of a trend. It's not a blip due to COVID. It's part of a growing trend. And in fact, in acknowledgement of this, for the last few years, the various indices, the FTSE and the MSCI on the stock markets, have been running fossil-free indices. So like investing in one of their standard indices, a normal FTSE or a normal MSCI, These are exactly the same. The only difference being that these indices don't contain any investments in the fossil fuel industry. And for the last 5 years, these have consistently outperformed their parent indices. So the fossil fuel ones are outperforming the sort of standard ones with fossil fuel investments included. Now, also, there is a strong financial case for this, and if you were to look into it, I'm sure you'd find much more evidence of this growing trend away from fossil fuels, in much the same way that investment turned away over time from investing in the tobacco industry. This is much the same thing, and it's one of those things that if the West Yorkshire Pension Fund don't acknowledge, they will ultimately end up holding a load of investments that aren't worth anything, because no one will want to invest them, but they stubbornly refuse to look at this trend, really. Now, morally as well, I would say that it's something vital. It doesn't sit well to have a pension fund, which is meant to provide for people's later lives, investing in something that is causing manifest danger and loss of life throughout the world, particularly in some of the less developed countries, such as Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, are all experiencing thousands of deaths as a result of drought, disease, and floods. I find that particularly ironic in that many, obviously with our diverse communities in West Yorkshire, a lot of the pension fund members come from have got family back in these countries. And also for our future generations, the point of a pension fund is obviously to allow people to plan for their future. But I don't think anyone now would doubt the reality of climate change, or would question that it is causing man-made action, particularly the fossil fuel industry, is causing damage. And so I would argue that a simple step that the committee could advise the council to do is to pursue with as much vigour as they possibly can, forcing West Yorkshire Pension Fund to divest from fossil fuels. Or, as I said, contact one of the other numerous councils or organisations throughout the UK who've already switched to a divested portfolio and ask them how they did it, and go with whoever they do. Thank you very much.
Great. Excellent, Phil. Very well argued. Colleagues, there's a lot. Obviously, we'll right back to the gentleman, but there's a lot going on regarding West Yorkshire Pension Fund disinvestment. It's interesting how pension sector is one of the most forward-looking sectors of the private sector, for want of a better expression, and it's interesting that they're very much wanting to go down this route. Now, Councillor Andrew Scopes has asked to come talk to us regarding the West Yorkshire Pension Fund. What I propose is that we bring this as an item at the next available juncture for SEAC to discuss. It is incredibly important, and there is a lot going on in the country and in the wider world regarding pension disinvestment from carbon assets. So are people all right with that? Yeah? Seeing nods from members, wonderful, thank you so much. Councillor, before I go to do the admin and wrap up the end, I think Councillor Shad wants to just come in for a sec.
Thank you, Chair. Really appreciate that. I hope you can hear me. I forgot to declare my interest as a taxi driver in the last the topic on the clean air zone, so I thought I'll just put that on record. Thank you very much. Apologies.
No, thanks very much. Excellent, well done. Appreciate that. So, been a really great session today, despite some internet connectivity problems. It reminded me of March and April of this year with internet connectivity issues. So, in terms of next meetings and the admin side of things, the next scheduled meeting is down for the 18th of January. However, what I propose is that we organise, well, Harriet organises a date for a special one-item meeting at some point in November or December, because we have to go over what would have been under normal circumstances, our annual report to full council that we would have done in our first municipal year of operations. However, this being 2020 and all, things are a little out of whack. So that will be going to full council some point in the new year to be confirmed. But we do have to have our annual report written and squared away by then. So we will contact you all regarding dates and things. Governance will do. Is that okay, colleagues? We really do have to have that special meeting. And look, one of the benefits of doing these things remotely is it's a much less significant logistical effort to get together for a one-item meeting. Colleagues, okay with that? Silence is acquiescence. or submission or something like that. Anyway, wonderful. That's really appreciated, colleagues. And like I said, the 18th of January is our next regular meeting. We'll bring the West Yorkshire Pension Fund item to that meeting. Yeah. So we can keep the special one to just one item. Because it won't. I don't think it's going to be a particularly short item. So let's keep it to one. And on that, has anyone got any other AOBs or anything like that? Nope. Wonderful. In that case, thank you all for your contributions. Have a safe commute 4 meters to the kitchen, to put the kettle on. And thank you very much. And goodbye to our worldwide audience.